Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever woken up in the middle of the night, heart pounding because the face of someone who betrayed you flashed across your mind? Have you ever replayed the words of someone who doubted you, humiliated you, wrote you off as a failure? Have you ever tasted the bitterness of someone taking from you what was rightfully yours, respect, opportunity, dignity, and felt powerless to fight back in that moment? That sting, that anger, that gnawing feeling deep in your chest that keeps you awake and eats at your peace, that is not something to run from, that is something to harness. That is the raw fuel of transformation. Don't you want revenge on your enemies? Don't you want to walk into the very rooms where they laughed at you, where they dismissed you, and make them choke on their own disbelief? Don't you want to build so high, so unshakable, that their whispers turn into silence? Now let me be clear, I am not talking about petty revenge. I'm not telling you to go slash tires or send poison letters. That kind of nonsense is weakness disguised as strength. Real revenge is not about lowering yourself. It's about elevating yourself so far above the reach of those who once held you down that they can't even breathe the same air as you anymore. Real revenge is outgrowing them so violently that their names, their actions, their cruelty become irrelevant. But here's the paradox. You can only do that if you first embrace the sting of what they did to you instead of running from it. Science tells us something fascinating. When the brain experiences betrayal, humiliation, or rejection, the very same neural circuits that light up when we feel physical pain ignite like a fire. It's not all in your head. It's not imaginary. The pain is real. You've been burned. Your brain processes rejection like a knife to the body. That's why you feel it in your chest, in your gut, in your muscles. And here's the beauty of it. That same pain can become a trigger for massive growth. Just as the body responds to stress in the gym by building stronger muscle fibers, your mind, when exposed to rejection, betrayal, and doubt, can either collapse or adapt. The people who win, the ones you remember, are those who took that pain and forged it into discipline, ambition, and fire. Let me tell you a story. There was once a boy who grew up in a family where no one believed in him. He wasn't the brightest in school. He wasn't the fastest on the field, and every time he opened his mouth, he was told to be quiet, you'll never amount to anything. Teachers laughed, relatives rolled their eyes, neighbors whispered. One day at 12 years old, after failing yet another exam, his teacher told him in front of the class, "You are destined to be nothing, nothing." That word carved into him like a scar. But he made a decision that day, that nothing would one day walk back into that room as everything. Years later, after building a company worth billions, after employing thousands, after creating an empire that changed industries, he returned to that very classroom, not to curse the teacher, not to spit on the floor, but to stand on the stage as the keynote speaker for the school's anniversary. That teacher was in the front row, white-haired, silent, watching the nothing prove to the world what happens when humiliation becomes hunger. That is revenge. That is the kind of revenge I'm talking about. But here's the challenge. Most people waste their pain. They drown it in alcohol, numb it with distraction, or soften it with excuses. They allow the wound to fester instead of letting it heal into scar tissue that strengthens. You see, neuroscience also shows us that the brain is plastic. It rewires itself according to repeated focus. If you feed your brain bitterness, it loops bitterness. If you feed it self-pity, it loops helplessness. But if you feed it obsession, the relentless drive to prove, to rise, to conquer, then that very same brain rewires itself into a weapon sharper than any blade your enemies ever swung at you. You literally become a different person. That's the science of revenge done right. Now think about your enemies. Don't pretend you don't have them. Everyone has them. Maybe they're people who wronged you openly. Maybe they're the silent ones who smile to your face but root for your failure behind your back. Maybe they're the systems, the institutions, the structures that never gave you a fair shot. You have enemies, and the question is not whether you'll get back at them. The question is how. Will you crumble and give them the satisfaction of being right about you? Or will you rise and make their existence irrelevant by the sheer force of your achievement? Take, for example, Oprah Winfrey, abused as a child, mocked for her weight, told she was unfit for television. Imagine if she had swallowed those insults, curled up, and accepted that verdict. Instead, she rose to become one of the most influential women in the world. Every time her face appeared on screens in millions of homes, Every time her words inspired millions to rise higher, that was revenge. Not a word had to be spoken to those who doubted her. Her existence became the evidence. Or think of Nelson Mandela, imprisoned for 27 years. His captors tried to break him, erase him, make him vanish. But when he walked out of that prison head high and later stood as the president of the nation that once caged him, that was revenge. Not a bullet fired, not a fist thrown. His revenge was dignity. His revenge was transformation. But I know what some of you are thinking right now. That's all good for billionaires and presidents and celebrities. But what about me? I'm just trying to get by. I'm not trying to change the world. Let me stop you right there. That voice in your head, that's the very voice your enemies want you to believe. That's the voice of smallness. That's the voice of surrender. Revenge doesn't always mean standing on a world stage. Sometimes revenge is as simple as breaking free from the family curse of addiction. Sometimes it's building a business when everyone said you'd fail. Sometimes it's raising kids with love when you were raised with none. Sometimes it's walking into a reunion 10 years later, unrecognizable, because you finally stopped letting laziness kill you. That is revenge too. You understand? Revenge is not about them. It's about you. It's about deciding you refuse to be defined by the blows you've taken. It's about transmuting every insult, every betrayal, every scar into rocket fuel. And it's about doing it in such a way that those who once held power over you are forced to sit in silence, powerless, as they watch you soar. And here's the science again. Studies show that people who channel anger into constructive action perform at higher levels than those who suppress it or wallow in it. Anger, when harnessed, sharpens focus, increases persistence, boosts resilience. It is not a curse, it is a catalyst. The difference lies in whether you let it consume you or whether you grab it by the throat and bend it to your will. So I ask you again, don't you want revenge on your enemies? Don't you want to walk into the rooms where you were dismissed and own them? Don't you want to see the faces of those who doubted you freeze in disbelief? Don't you want to look in the mirror and know, deep down, that you are no longer the person they laughed at? You are the one they fear to even whisper about now. This is not theory. This is not philosophy. This is life. This is neuroscience. This is history. This is humanity. Every great transformation has roots in rejection. Every legend has an origin story filled with betrayal. Every empire is built on the bones of doubt. The only question is whether you will be one of the few who turns that pain into power, or whether you'll die with the laughter of your enemies echoing in your ears. Ladies and gentlemen, I will stop here for now. Picture this with me for a moment. Imagine standing in front of the very people who told you that you couldn't. Imagine looking them in the eyes as they realize silently, helplessly, that their words fueled the very fire that burned down the walls they built around you. That is a moment of reckoning few ever get to taste, not because it's rare, but because so few are willing to go through the furnace required to get there. And yet, that furnace is the one thing that separates the mediocre from the monumental. You see, most people are terrified of pain. They run from it. They medicate it, drown it, excuse it, and decorate it with nice-sounding phrases like forgive and forget, when in reality what they're doing is avoiding the work. Now, I am not dismissing forgiveness. Forgiveness can be powerful, but forgetting, that's foolish, because forgetting means you've lost the lesson. Forgetting means you've buried the very energy source that could catapult you forward. Neuroscience tells us that emotionally charged memories are the ones our brains prioritize for long-term storage. Why? Because they're critical for survival. The brain wants you to remember pain, betrayal, rejection, not to paralyze you, but to sharpen you, to remind you never to be caught off guard again. When you erase that, you erase one of the most powerful motivators a human being can access. Let me tell you a story about a man named Howard Schultz. He grew up poor in government housing, the son of a truck driver who struggled to keep work. He watched his father's dignity get chipped away by a system that didn't care if he lived or died. He could have accepted that as his destiny, but he didn't. He built Starbucks into a global empire. And when he tells the story, he admits It was the memory of watching his father powerless that drove him day after day to build something that gave people not just jobs, but careers with dignity. His revenge wasn't against a single enemy, but against a world that told him people like him didn't get to win. Every cup of coffee served became proof that his father's humiliation was not the end of the story. Now, some of you sitting here tonight carry wounds from people much closer, maybe a parent who abandoned you, maybe a friend who betrayed you, maybe a lover who left you in pieces, and that wound is still raw. And let me tell you this, the sweetest revenge is not proving them wrong in words, but in actions. It's not sending them a message at midnight saying, look at me now. No, the sweetest revenge is when you no longer even care to send the message because your life is so full, so powerful, so elevated that they become a footnote in a story that's no longer about them. That's when you've won. That's when you've taken back your power. Think about Michael Jordan. In high school, he was cut from the varsity basketball team. Imagine the humiliation. Imagine the whispers in the hallway. Imagine the laughter. But instead of collapsing, he turned that cut into fuel. He practiced more than anyone else. He played with a chip so large on his shoulder that it carried him into history as the greatest basketball player of all time. To this day, when he talks about his journey, you can still hear the edge in his voice. That sting never left him. He didn't bury it, he used it. His revenge was not just making the team, his revenge was owning the game. Science backs this up. The amygdala, the part of your brain responsible for emotional memory, doesn't just record experiences, it tags them with intensity. That's why you remember your heartbreak more than your trip to the grocery store. That's why insults stick longer than compliments. The question is, what will you do with that? Will you let the amygdala turn you into a victim, looping pain endlessly? Or will you let it become the anchor point from which you launch your most powerful transformation? There's the truth. Greatness is not born out of comfort. Nobody ever built an empire sitting on a couch, binging shows, scrolling endlessly through a phone. Greatness is born out of pressure, out of being underestimated, out of being told you can't again and again. Your enemies, whether they know it or not, are handing you a gift. Every insult, every betrayal, every rejection is a deposit in your bank of rage. And that rage, when invested correctly, compounds into wealth, power, freedom, and a life so big they won't even recognize you anymore. But let me warn you, there's a dark side to this if you're not careful. Some people become so obsessed with proving their enemies wrong that they lose themselves in the process. They win the battle, but lose the war. Because they build lives that are impressive on the outside, but hollow on the inside. They get the money, the house, the cars, but inside they're still prisoners to the ghosts of their past. That is not true revenge. True revenge is freedom. True revenge is when your success is not chained to their recognition, but to your own self-respect. It's when you can look at yourself in the mirror and know, I did this, not for them, not to show them, but because I refuse to let their version of me become my truth. Let me share another story. J.K. Rowling. She was broke, divorced, a single mother, rejected by 12 publishers, 12 doors slammed in her face. Imagine that. Sitting at a kitchen table, hungry, exhausted, children crying, and 12 different people with degrees, credentials, and authority telling you you're not good enough. Do you know what she did? She kept writing. And when Harry Potter was finally published, it didn't just sell, it became a cultural phenomenon. Those 12 publishers, they had to watch the books they rejected become one of the best-selling series in history. That's revenge. Revenge that doesn't require anger, just relentless commitment. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying your enemies should be your only fuel, but they can be the spark, they can be the ignition. Once the fire is lit, it's your responsibility to keep it burning, to feed it with discipline, with habits, with vision. But never forget who gave you the match. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can whisper to yourself when you want to quit is, they're waiting for me to fail, and I won't give them that satisfaction. There was a fascinating study from Stanford University where researchers tracked people who had faced early rejection and failure in their careers. Decades later, they found that those who used those experiences as motivation ended up outperforming their peers who had smooth starts. Why? Because they developed resilience. They had something to prove. They turned rejection into obsession, and obsession into mastery. The enemies they once cursed had unknowingly built their greatness. So I'll ask you one more time. Don't you want revenge on your enemies? Don't you want to make every single person who doubted you regret the day they opened their mouth against you? Don't you want to turn every wound into a weapon, every scar into a badge, every insult into a stepping stone? Don't you want to rise so high that their laughter sounds like whispers in the basement while you're dancing on the roof? Because if you don't, then what was the point of the pain? What was the point of the betrayal? What was the point of the sleepless nights, the tears, the humiliation? If you don't use it, then you've let them win twice. First, when they hurt you, and again, when you wasted the gift they handed you in that hurt. There is a moment, and some of you in this room have felt it, when your back is against the wall, when you've got nothing left but your breath and your rage, when you feel abandoned, underestimated, forgotten. That moment is a fork in the road. You can surrender, and in doing so, confirm every word your enemies ever said about you, or you can choose to fight, to claw, to bleed forward, to rise. That moment defines not just your life, but your legacy, because it is in those moments that character is forged like steel in fire. Think of Thomas Edison. He failed thousands of times before perfecting the light bulb. Thousands. Each failure was an enemy whispering, "You're wasting your time." Each critic told him, "It's impossible." He could have quit, but he didn't. And when the world lit up for the first time, that was revenge on every single person who mocked him, who doubted him, who thought he was insane. He didn't need to tell them. The light spoke for itself. Now think about yourself. What is the light you're supposed to bring into this world? What have you been running from because someone told you it was impossible? What dream have you buried because someone laughed at it? What part of yourself have you silenced because someone convinced you that you weren't worthy? That silence is killing you, and the only way to break it is to rise so unapologetically that your very existence becomes a rebuke to every doubter. Here's what most people don't realize. Your enemies are not just individuals. They can be institutions, they can be circumstances, they can be poverty, addiction, illness, systemic injustice. And if you treat them as unbeatable giants, they will crush you. But if you treat them as training partners, as the resistance you push against to grow stronger, they will shape you into something unstoppable. Resistance is not your enemy, it's your gym. Every betrayal is a weight, every rejection is a set, every failure is a rep. You don't run from them. You lift them until you become a force so strong, nothing can hold you down again. Science tells us that stress, in the right doses, actually strengthens the brain. It sharpens memory, enhances focus, increases adaptability, but only if you engage with it. Only if you step into it instead of running away. Chronic avoidance is what kills people. It leads to depression, anxiety, and stagnation. But leaning into stress, transforming it into action, that's what creates breakthroughs. Your enemies create stress. Your revenge is to alchemize it into strength. Do you know why people root for underdogs? Because deep down, every human being knows what it feels like to be underestimated. We all crave the story of the one who was told they couldn't and then did. That's why Rocky became a cultural icon. That's why David and Goliath resonates across centuries. That's why we cheer when the impossible is shattered. Because it's not just their victory, it becomes ours. And I'm telling you right now, your story could be that story for someone else. Someone is watching you even if you don't realize it. A younger sibling, a child, a friend, maybe even a stranger. And when you rise, you don't just get revenge on your enemies, you become proof to others that they can too. But you must commit. You must decide that you will not let their words be the final chapter of your story. You must decide that every insult will become an investment. Every betrayal will become a lesson. Every scar will become a source of pride. And when the day comes, and it will, when you stand in the place of your victory, you won't even need to mention their names, because your success will shout louder than any insult they ever hurled. Now, some of you are still wrestling with forgiveness. You're wondering, if I pursue revenge through success, doesn't that mean I'm still chained to them? Listen carefully. Forgiveness does not mean pretending it never happened. Forgiveness means you don't carry the poison of hate in your bloodstream. But revenge through achievement, that is not hate. That is transformation. That is growth. That is you saying, what you meant for harm, I turned into power. You are not chained to them. You are propelled by them. That's the difference. Let me give you one final story. A young man was abandoned by his father, raised in poverty, mocked for his stutter, and dismissed as weak. He was told repeatedly that he'd never be a leader, never command respect, never rise. That young man was Winston Churchill. He went on to become one of the most iconic leaders in history, rallying an entire nation in its darkest hour. Every speech he gave, every word that echoed across the airwaves was revenge. Revenge on a world that doubted him. Revenge on the voices that told him he was nothing. His words changed the course of history. So ladies and gentlemen, don't waste your pain. Don't bury your anger. Don't soften the edges of your scars. Use them, channel them, let them drive you. Because the greatest revenge you can ever deliver is not hatred, not violence, not petty acts of spite. It is undeniable, irrefutable, unstoppable success. It is rising so far above the noise that the very people who once mocked you are left in silence, forced to face the undeniable truth. They were wrong about you. And when you stand there, in that silence, when you breathe in the air of victory, you'll realize something extraordinary. The revenge you sought was never really about them at all. It was about reclaiming yourself. It was about proving to the only person who ever truly mattered, you, that you were always enough, that you were always capable, that you were always destined for more. So I ask you one final time, don't you want revenge on your enemies? Don't you want to turn every wound into a weapon, every doubt into a declaration, every insult into an anthem? Don't you want to rise so high that their voices can no longer reach you? Then stop waiting, stop hesitating, stop giving your enemies free rent in your mind. Pick up the weight they handed you and lift it until you are unrecognizable. Build, climb, conquer. Make them watch, make them silent, make yourself proud. Because when the dust settles, when the lights go out, when the story of your life is told, let it be said that you did not die in the shadow of your enemies. Let it be said that you turned their laughter into your fuel, their betrayal into your fire, and their doubt into your destiny. Let it be said that you didn't just survive them, you buried them with your success. Ladies and gentlemen, the choice is yours, and it begins now.